Section 10 of the Diary of a Russian Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Sophia. The Diary of a Russian Lady by Barbara Doukhovsky. Chapter 10. The Caucasus. We went to Tiflis towards the middle of May. On the way, I made the acquaintance of two cadets of the Corps de Pache, grandsons of the Shah of Persia. The youngest prince, Ruknuddin Mirza, a charming chap with exquisite oriental eyes, took particularly my fancy. He had already fallen a little under my spell, and I looked upon him as a kind of blessed invention for my entertainment on this trip. As for his eldest brother, he seemed to be of rather a quiet disposition, and I did not care a rap for him. It was almost dark when we reached Tiflis. The Starutskys received us in the friendliest way. We were also kindly greeted by my aunt, Natalie Rohrberg, the wife of the chief of the military engineers of the Caucasus. She wanted me to come and see her just as often as I could. I can't say how good and kind she was. We got on admirably. It became my favorite pastime to watch through the iron-barred gate of the Rohrbergs' garden, opening on the summer theatre, the endless string of people promenading between the acts. My guilty curiosity was noticed by an elegant swell, whom I saw staring and making eyes at me. I met him a few days afterwards at a dancing party in the casino. He was quick to seize the chance of talking to me and exclaimed, "How happy I am to meet you! I have desired it so tremendously." Impudent fellow! As I was not a bit disposed to be gracious to him, I stopped his effusions, turning my back pointedly. When I met that brazen-faced individual after that in the streets, he raised his hat in vain to me. I pretended not to perceive him. I found a jolly companion in the person of my cousin Natalie Starutsky. One evening, we went to see La Traviata sung in Armenian, which rather disagreed with Italian music. Natalie was, like me, easily moved to laughter. As the opera proceeded, we became more and more hilarious, and our behavior was such that caused many disapproving glances to be cast in our direction. At the most pathetic moment, when the prima donna breathed her last breath, we ran out of our box, putting our handkerchiefs to our mouths and overturning the chairs on our passage. I used to see a great deal of the Persian princes. Ruknuddin Mirza was rapidly losing his heart to me. One day we went out riding together, and whilst our horses were galloping at full speed, the idea came to me to make my page gather a wildflower growing in the grass. He managed to do it, but during that acrobatic exercise, his casque rolled off, and instead of treating him commiseratingly, I only snubbed him for his pains. Horsemanship was my ruling passion. I easily found partners to accompany me in my rides, and careered through the streets of Tiflis, followed by my cavaliers, enjoying to overtake them like a cyclone. I cantered home in high spirits, with a heated face and my hair coming down, most of it outside my cap, not in it. I frequently brought my cavaliers home to tea, and if they didn't happen to be particularly interesting, I proceeded straight to bed, and the Starutskys had to sit with my guests and entertain them as best they could, whilst I slept the sleep of the just. One day, in turning over an album, I came upon a photograph the sight of which made me exclaim, "Oh, who is that good-looking officer?" That is Sarge Mihailovich Doukhovsky, a young general attached to the person of the Grand Duke Michael, Commander-in-Chief of the Army of the Caucasus, said my Aunt Rohrberg. She told me that he was the youngest general in the Russian army, being only 36 years old, that he had a splendid career before him, and was in short everything desirable. She added that now I had a capital opportunity of making a brilliant match, and that I must spread my net to catch that big fish and set immediately to work to captivate him. That was enough to set me against the general. There was something very distasteful in the idea of such a marriage, and I was not at all willing to sacrifice my youth to the advantage of rank and money. When first General Doukhovsky was introduced to me, I was slightly disappointed. He was so reserved in manner and did not condescend to take much notice of me, a method of treatment to which I was not accustomed, being brought up with the idea that I was to be petted and bowed down to by men. I had been adored all my young life, and this indifference stung my vanity. I was far from the idea of falling in love with General Doukhovsky. Nevertheless, I was annoyed by the coolness with which he regarded me. Admiration was my daily bread. He failed to offer it to me, and that instantly aroused in me an intention of making him display some interest in me. Sarge Mihailovich was quite unlike all the men I had ever met before. He was immovable as a stone, and didn't look like the sort of man whose head could be easily turned, and would surely never become a girl's plaything. Nevertheless, there was something which drew me towards him, and day by day he got hold of me, and I meant to win his heart if it only could be done. All my passing fancies only kindled a spark that was to burn for another man's benefit. But why, oh why, was this iceberg of a human being incapable of understanding? He was so queer, I did not know how to manage him. It was impossible to draw him into the mildest flirtation. We were on the polite conversation footing, nothing else. In mid-June, I was left all of a sudden on my Aunt Rohrberg's hands. Mamma started off for Russia for a few weeks, and the Starutskys went to Beloy Kluch, their summer residence. And as I did not like to leave Sarge Mihailovich behind, I preferred to remain in Tiflis. Day by day, the general's visits grew more frequent. One evening, he got up a picnic in his garden to which he invited us. Whilst we had tea laid under the trees, I remarked that a change was coming over our host. He seemed in a boyish mood and altogether forgetful of his usual careful correctness, and put aside all his reserve. He lay at my feet and tickled my cheek with a blade of grass. This was the hour of my triumph. I caught his eyes, and they said quite plainly, "I like you." Could he be catching fire at last? I saw now that I was not wholly indifferent to him. He was looking at me with new eyes, the eyes of an awakened sleeper. Was it the awakening germ of some deeper feeling, perhaps? In parting, he squeezed my hand and held it in his for a few seconds longer than the conventions allowed. Every day drew me closer to Sarge Mihailovich. The more I saw him, the more my affection deepened. and I soon found that he was for me the dearest of created beings. The heat in Tiflis was very trying. There was scarcely air enough to breathe, and my aunt decided to go to Borsham, the summer residence of the Grand Duke Michael, a delightful watering place buried in verdure and surrounded by mountains covered with thick forests. Sarge Mihailovich came round occasionally to see how we got on. I looked forward eagerly to his visits. His society became very dear to me, for he succeeded in winning my love. My heart had spoken at last, and I was sensible of the tremendous power he exercised over me. I was beginning to know that I, too, had a little power over him. Sarge Mihailovich appeared so pleased when he saw me. His hand trembled when it touched mine. His affection seemed to rise with extraordinary rapidity from 0 to boiling point, and it was whispered that General Doukhovsky had serious views towards me. My aunt, with her all-seeing eyes, had perceived for some time already the turn events had taken. In July, the general had to go to Russia for a short time. On the eve of his departure, he came to Borsham. That evening altered the course of my life. He managed to get me away from the others on the terrace. We were so happy to be left alone and drew closer to each other, watching the glowworm's fairy lamps amidst the shrubs below. For some time there was no conversation between us, but there was no need for words. We looked into each other's eyes and found that one can kiss even with looks. Suddenly, Sarge Mihailovich bent over me, his face drawn with emotion, and asked me if I cared for him a little bit. The moment was decisive. My head dropped on my arms on the table, and tears were my only answer. I felt assured of one thing now, that he loved me. Yet, what had he said to me? Nothing, and yet everything. On the next day, when Sarge Mihailovich came to bid us goodbye, he seemed quite altered. He was changed altogether, exceedingly cool and formal in his manner to me. His greeting was gravely courteous, that was all. What was this sudden change in him, in voice and eyes? His entirely incomprehensible attitude made me horribly unhappy. Had he changed his mind at the last moment? All through his visit he maintained his air of frigid reserve. He was so cold that he froze me. An icy feeling crept over me, and I suddenly had the sensation of being a great way off from him. I could not help feeling hurt and wounded, and struggled hard to keep the tears from my eyes. Not for worlds would I have appeared disappointed. Sarge Mihailovich went away saying goodbye frigidly, and we parted upon very cold terms. When he had gone, I missed him more than I could have imagined possible. His face haunted my dreams and my waking, and I thought of him the first thing in the morning, the last thing at night. I see now that I didn't know what love meant until I met Sarge Mihailovich. How I longed for his first letter, but the day slipped away without a word or sign from him. I was so horribly disappointed and tortured with doubt. Had he forgotten then all about me? I began to feel extremely uncomfortable, seeing him slipping away from me, and wished I had not let him go. I could bear it no longer, and wrote a volume to him, telling him I wanted him to cheer me up, and that I was looking forward impatiently to seeing him soon. Day by day, I waited for his answer. At last, the post brought me a letter from him. I tore the envelope open with trembling hands and scarlet cheeks, but there was nothing in it to gladden my longing eyes or to fill my empty heart. His letter was short and scrappy, with no words of endearment. It might have been written to a sister. He told me so little about himself, and hardly anything at all about myself, and addressed me in such a formal way, ending his letter with sincere regards to me. I hated sincere regards. I continued to be quite in the dark as to his plans for the future, and didn't like at all to be fed upon chance scraps. I wanted a whole bone. I don't know when in all my life I had been more vexed and had shed such hot, passionate tears. But pride arose, forbidding my heart to ache for the loss of his love. What was the use of crying my eyes out? I was determined to forget Sarge Mihailovich, putting him as much as possible out of my thoughts and passing a sponge over our love affair. To keep my spirits up, I rushed into all sorts of adventures, exposing myself to ill-natured comments. People began to say nasty things of me, and my Aunt Rohrberg implored me to put a stop to my disgraceful flirtations, warning me that the talk would reach the ears of Sarge Mihailovich. She tried to excuse his conduct in my eyes, and said that, as his experiences were much wider than mine, he was more cool-headed, and knew what he was about. Therefore, he could not act inconsiderately in such a serious matter as marriage. Yes, but as for me, being prompt and vivacious, I hated delays, and could not possibly just take time and think things over like him. I can't stop and wait. I continued to wear a steel armor over my heart, and I now spent much of my time out of doors, riding. Sarge Mihailovich had permitted me, during his absence, to mount his lovely Arab, a young and spirited horse who proved sufficiently troublesome the first time I mounted him. I had to spring hastily into my saddle. The horse gave a bound when the groom left his head, and set off galloping like the wind. My hand was nearly dislocated with the strain of holding him. I succeeded in managing my fiery steed, and brought him to a standstill before a villa inhabited by Mrs. Blix, a charming lady whom I knew only by sight. She happened to be on her balcony just then, and invited me to dismount, in order to recover myself from my fright. My wrist was aching a good deal, and had begun to swell. After Mrs. Blix had bound it up, I remounted my Arab, who behaved perfectly well on our way home. After my first breakneck ride, I succeeded to be mistress of my horse. He went like a lamb now, and I felt as much at home on his back as in a rocking chair. I liked Mrs. Blix and her 2 daughters very much, and often dropped in for a chat. I met in their house 2 schoolboys, a prince and a simple mortal. I kept the prince in the background and displayed a marked preference for the simple mortal, welcoming him as a relief to threatened monotony. There was nothing particularly entrancing in him, but he was still better than no lover at all, and I began to flirt with him until he was half mad. We wandered away from the others on every available occasion, and sauntered together into the park. He drew my arm within his and pressed it tenderly to his heart, whilst our eyes met, speaking volumes. In that moment we seemed very much in love with one another, and wanted to put off as long as possible getting back home. I took a fancy, one day, on visiting Mrs. Blix to stimulate a fainting fit. I lay at full length on a low sofa, wrapped up in a loose white dressing gown belonging to Mrs. Blix, whilst my affrighted schoolboys made a great fuss over me. They bathed my temples with eau de cologne and put a bottle of sal volatile under my nose. I took delight in prolonging that mystification as long as I could, surveying them out of the corners of my half-closed eyes. Though it was only September, the weather suddenly turned cold and wet. The sky was low and gray. A gusty wind was driving the fallen leaves across the park. We decided to return to Tiflis. Mamma was back already from Russia, and soon after I heard that Sarge Mihailovich had come also. We met at a dinner party a few days after his arrival. At the sight of him, my heart began to beat very quickly. Do what I would to banish him from my thoughts, I never ceased to love him. But he looked so frigid when he came up to me that I was cut to the quick. Surely he might look a little more pleased at seeing me. Was he doing it to provoke me? I felt that something had broken between us, and that we should never be the same to each other after that night. My anger rose against him, and I tried to look stolidly indifferent, and if possible, to be more frigid than he was. I ignored Sarge Mihailovich the whole evening and behaved shockingly, talking a lot of stupid nonsense. I did not know myself what I was saying, and Mamma looked disapprovingly at me across the table. I own that my behavior was shameful, and that I deserved to have lost the best husband that ever a woman desired. When I got home, the evil spirit went out of me, and I felt awfully remorseful. I would not lose Sarge Mihailovich for anyone or anything in this world. I was not going to run away from my happiness, and at any price I had to see him again and make it up with him. Whatever happened, I must not let him go. I resolved, therefore, upon the desperate step of writing to him, and it had to be done at once, or my courage would fail me. I sat down and scribbled a few lines telling him that I wanted to apologize for my extremely silly conduct. His answer contained an appointment for the following afternoon at 4 o'clock. He asked me to come out for a ride with him. I passed a restless night, glowing with impatience at the next day's rendezvous. I wanted to see him so much, yet I dreaded the ordeal. How could I meet him? How could I look into his face again? I got up nervous and excited. The whole morning I had been in a fever. My hands were as cold as ice, and my cheeks burned like fire. How slowly the hours did pass. When Sarge Mihailovich was announced, I went hot all over, and my emotion was so uncontrollable that I fled into my room, in which I felt more safe. My cousin Natalie dragged me out by force, and the next minute we came face to face, Sarge Mihailovich and I. The first step was made. We mounted our horses and set off at a trot. Soon after we walked them slowly, riding side by side. For some time we did not exchange a word. Then suddenly Sarge Mihailovich put his arm round me and drew me towards him till our lips met. He told me then that he loved me and asked me if I cared enough for him to become his wife. I only answered with my eyes, which spoke the plainest yes, and thus, under the open sky, we pledged our troth, for a minute forgetting everything but our two selves. I gave him with happiness the gift of myself. Nothing could shake my faith in him now. For me, that day marked the red-letter day of my calendar. I wrote back to Tiflis, an engaged girl, and announced our betrothal to Mamma. I longed to inform the world at large of it. Our betrothal was made known the next day, and hearty were the congratulations addressed to us. I wrote to my father to ask for his consent and blessing, which he gave with pleasure. Our wedding was to take place at Dolgik in the beginning of April. Sarge Mihailovich, Sarji as I called him now, spent a good deal of his time with me. We used to pass all our evenings together in the library, where we contrived a sort of recess, furnished with a sofa, in which we could talk in peace. Nothing will ever make me forget the hours we passed together, hours which were all but too brief for us. We forgot that clocks existed. Dear days, so long ago, yet so vivid to me. We sat on the sofa with our heads very close together, pretending to read out of a book that lay on my lap face downwards. One evening, as I sat thus, side by side with Sarji, my hand imprisoned in his, developing our plans for our future happiness, the footsteps of my uncle Staritsky recalled us to reality. Seeing that I held my book upside down, Uncle went to fetch a venerable calf-bound volume containing the Code of Laws, and gave it to me, saying laughingly that perhaps we should be more interested with that sort of literature. I was the happiest girl on earth. It was so good to feel that Sarji cared for me. He became my world, my all. I was no longer the same girl I had been. My time of playing with the sentiments of men was over. Surely there were two Vava Galitzins, one that had been blessed with the happy faculty of dismissing one love from her mind the moment that she began to occupy herself with another, and one who, in spite of her frivolous outside, loved only one man in the world, her Sarji. Now and then I had little fits of ill temper, days when I was out of sorts with myself and everyone else. My griefs did not last long, but while they lasted, they were very strong. Sometimes, after short quarrels between us, I would lock myself up in my room, and flinging myself across my bed, burst into stormy tears, my hair all disheveled and hanging loose like a repentant Magdalena. These sudden outbursts of passion cleared off quickly, and I soon made it up with Sarji. Nearly a month had passed since our engagement, and our visit was near drawing to a close. It was time to start on our homeward journey. I left Tiflis with heartbreaking regret. I hated to leave Sarji behind. He had grown into my heart, and I could not bear the idea of being separated from him. I didn't know how I was going to get along till April without a sight of him. Deprived of his company, my life would be lonely beyond words. 5 months were such an awfully long time to wait. We promised to write to each other every day, but that was a poor consolation. We traveled to Russia via Poti. Early the following morning, our boat was to leave that town, and we had to pass the night at a hotel. I was tired and depressed. Directly after dinner, I got into bed and cried myself to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, the wind moaned outside, and the rain poured down in torrents. I went to the window and looked at the unquiet sea. Great waves were tumbling over the pier. It was a very unpleasant day indeed for a sail. Therefore, we decided to travel back to Tiflis, and afterwards take the carriage road that leads to Caucasus. We reached Tiflis in the evening, and gave Sarji a pleasant surprise. Oh, there was no mistake about his being glad to see me. much to my egotistical delight, the roads were encumbered by falls of great masses of snow, and we were to have a whole week of each other's company until they were cleared away. In my secret heart, I was cherishing a wild hope that new avalanches would fall and that we should be the longer together. But, alas, the roads were getting all right, and the dreaded day of our second separation rapidly approached. I grumbled a good deal at having to leave Tiflis again. I had never been so sorry to quit any place before. The high road from Tiflis to Caucasus is called the Military Georgian Road. The scenery is magnificent, but dreadfully wild, and I was awfully frightened to see that we were within a yard of the brinks of horrible precipices. As we got higher up in the mountains, the air became so rarefied that it was difficult to breathe. Our sledge, drawn by 2 horses, one in front of the other, dragged on slowly, rising. The blocks of snow that bordered our way formed a prison wall between the road and the world outside. Everything was a sort of wild, white, sleepy stillness. No sound arose but the clink of the harness. A large wooden cross rose on the highest point of the road. A flock of black crows flew across the leaden sky and wheeled about it, croaking piercingly. Everything looked so gray and cold, we found ourselves as in a bewitched, icy kingdom in a fairy tale. There was something very awe-inspiring about it all. It was night when we arrived at Caucasus, where we took the train to Kharkov. End of section 10.